Hi there, welcome back to the State of the Nation. I'm your host, Mike Sham, and as we analyse South Africa and its political movements, as we head towards a very critical election in 2024, it's time to hear from another new party that's entered the fray. And this party has a sort of quite a unique angle. The party is called Move SA, Move South Africa. And the leader is David Kabwa. David, welcome to the State of the Nation.
Really appreciate it, Mike. It is a privilege to be here.
You see how nice he's being to me, eh? See, that is the sound. That's the markings of a new political party. So, David, let's kick off. You're a young guy.
Right.
Age?
26.
26, and you've chosen to take a completely different route into politics.
Right.
And that is to start your own party. Have you been part of a other political movement before, or is this how you get into the game of politics?
So I've been involved in politics for some time. I started at a student level. I was voted SRC president as an independent candidate. And to give you an idea, at the time that I had started, running as an independent was considered political suicide. I finished my first term, I was re-elected for a second term, and now have one of the highest percentage votes in the history of my institution.
Which was?
University of Pretoria. And then went on to serve in the Gauteng Youth Sector Parliament, where I was then chosen to represent South Africa in the Commonwealth Youth Parliament, where I became the first African elected as Prime Minister of the Commonwealth Youth Parliament, overseeing youth legislative affairs across 54 different countries. Now, the reason why I formed a political party is because my initial intention was to contest as an independent. I'm not really one for party politics, but I do care about the issues, and I think that's the viewpoint that very many South Africans have. In light of the new electoral amendment bill, I was made aware of the fact that, well, if you vote for an independent, there's a chance that if they get more than their threshold, that your votes might get redistributed. This turned quite a lot of people away. So we went back to the drawing board and we said, well, we still need to make a move. That's how MOVE came to be.
But are you still centered on student issues, or what informs the decision to move from a very confined political space like a university onto a national platform? What do you think helps that along? Where do you think you're going to get your traction from?
Definitely from young people. I think representation really matters, particularly among youth. You might be following what's recently happened in Thailand, where it is considered to be an entire paradigm shift simply because young people stood up and decided to join what is happening within politics. They made a decision, and their decision is going on to change the entire country. When you look at university spaces, they're a microcosm of what we see in larger South African society.
Really?
Yes, indeed.
Would you say so? Because I mean, that sort of got into the lexicon, but maybe not really, because if you look at it, universities are quite elitist places. I know that the EFF would hate to hear that, but it is very much an elite space. And I'm not just inventing that. That is because if you take a percentage of people that end up at university, never mind graduate, it's a very, very low percentage of the population. Is it really representative? I mean, it's not representative of what in South Africa the ANC demeaningly calls the workers.
I would argue, yes, it is representative. And that's because the issues that are faced by students in particular are the same issues faced by all young people. When I would be sitting in my office, the first person will come, Mr. President, I haven't eaten for 3 days. I don't know what to do. Next person will walk in, I was unfortunately a victim of rape. Where do I go from here? Next person will come, well, I have debt, I have fees, or I don't have a place to sleep. On average, I was working quite literally about 19 hours a day on all manner of issues. What I had seen is that I dealt with everything from safety to security to fees to payment to matters of gender-based violence. And this translated into a number of other roles in which I find myself. I do think that, yes, they are elitist institutions, but that does not diminish the level of issues that are faced by young people. And I do think that institutions of higher learning definitely reflect that.
And of course, nowadays to start a party, it's not an easy undertaking. You need a certain level of support. I presume you got your signatures on campus. Is that about right?
In the beginning, yes, most of the signatures on campus, but we continue to grow. There's been quite a lot of traction, lots of young people great level of engagement from young professionals, from students, from youth that are seeking employment, and also just from wider South African society. What I'm very grateful for is that our mission and vision is really centered around young people, but we also value the importance of an intergenerational approach. One of our core tenets, I refer to it as bridge building, the belief that regardless of who you are or where you come from, if you have a meaningful contribution, that contribution must be heard. We build bridges for South Africans to be able to walk across. So yes, we are rooted among students, but we continue to grow, and that growth will definitely expand going into 2024.
So, of course, the burning question then comes down to why not? I mean, clearly you're of a very independent mindset. You said that was how you got into student politics, and now you started your own party. The question, I suppose, arises is, what is it that you're not seeing in the current big players of South African politics? Why not join a party?
Right, I do appreciate that. And funny enough, if it was just simply about positionality or entering the space in any capacity, there are much easier ways to go about it. You can imagine starting a political party is quite a long endeavor. It is a difficult endeavor. It is not easy. Now, what I believe is missing fundamentally is youth representation. What I mean by this is young people are often pigeonholed. Hey, you can participate, but we have a youth wing, and you can prove yourself in the youth wing, and then we'll roll you over at some point in the future. Now, I believe that young people are capable. I believe that young people are competent. I believe that young people have the ability to take up the space, and that is exactly what I am here to represent.
Okay, so you don't then see yourself ideologically at home in any of the political parties. Is that safe to say?
I think political parties in this day and age have evolved beyond ideology, where they've all developed a certain political culture and an organizational culture. And based on those nuances, my fundamental belief is that when you want to help people, you need to do all that you can to help people. Oftentimes, the way that you might want to help a particular individual, society, any kind of grouping might not fall within the wider political culture of certain parties. And based on that, it's one of the reasons why, well, you did mention, and I emphasize it again, an independent mindset. My view was that regardless of the color of your T-shirt, that we should be able to work together. And this is one of the reasons why we've taken the decision that we have with MOVE. So I don't have anything against any other political party. I just believe that things can be done different, and we are doing it differently.
So what are you doing?
So we focus on 3 areas. The first is accessibility, second is bridge building, and the third is reimagining political culture. All of this is rooted under the ideal of good governance. So what we're seeing is you will note that we have the 3 spheres of government: the executive, the legislature, and the judiciary. What we're seeing is that we need a greater sense of work, of agency, of input, of investment by role players within the legislative space, the ability to accurately and consistently represent people. And that's why what we're seeing is not so much a leadership crisis, it is a crisis of implementation, and all of that can be linked to a lack of good governance. Now, the reason why we focus on these 3 areas is because it is important for leaders to be accessible. If I can access my leader, I can let them know what's on my mind. If I can let them know what's on my mind, we have very important lines of communication, and that's open communication. This leads into the second point that I mentioned, bridge building, that if you're able to come to the table, I want to hear what you have to say. When I refer to reimagining political culture, fundamentally I have the belief that the greatest leaders are the most humble servants. So developing a culture where we realize that our leaders are to serve, and I want to be a good example of how to demonstrate that.
So I would imagine, and I was never involved in student politics, but I would imagine you kind of have an office, you get elected, people can come to you with their problems, right? And
Right.
you can move to solve them.
Right.
It's a very confined space.
Right.
The numbers are in this grand scheme of things pretty small.
Right.
On a national level, how are you going to listen to everybody's problems?
That's the importance of having a team. So I have an amazing team I'm working with, and within that team we have a communication subcommittee, and their role is just to ensure that any and all communications that are received are responded to. And I want to expand upon that because I believe that this approach can translate to a national level as well. A good example is while I was Prime Minister of the Commonwealth Youth Parliament, we had a bit of an issue with priority areas where those from developed countries argued that, well, greatest issue that we are facing is poverty. And those from developing countries argue that the greatest issue we're facing is poverty. Those from developed countries argue that no, you know what, it is climate change. And this led to an impasse. It led to a lot of intransigence. And the way that we crossed this bridge was I got everyone together and I came up with a bill. We called it the Intersectional Bill for Women in Agriculture, where did research and found that the agricultural sector was among the most widely represented within most of the countries where delegates were represented. The biggest stakeholder group within that sector was women. So fund women in the agricultural sector experiencing the negative fallout of climate change. What this did is it addressed two issues simultaneously, which was only possible by the approach of open communication and being able to listen, being able to implement, and being able to ensure that every voice was heard.
Yeah. Do you think poverty is South Africa's biggest issue?
I think poverty is among the biggest issues, but I think it will also depend on exactly what context it is that we are looking at. I think context really does matter. I think South Africa is an extremely intersectional society. So when you identify one issue, what you'll find is there are many issues that often bleed into that issue. And I think looking at issues in silos and isolationism is very detrimental towards solving the wider problems that we face. Poverty is a big issue, but it is also linked to various others.
Now, David, it seems to me, there's a slight age disparity between us, and I don't want to sound like that guy. It seems to me that, my understanding of poverty isn't, poor people. It seems to me that poverty is driven by lack of opportunity, lack of confidence, lack of opportunities, etc. But it sounds like you are advocating for a bigger nanny state than what the ANC is trying to put in place already. You want to respond to everybody's problems instead of empowering them to solve their own.
It's completely different. I believe in the importance of empowerment. But for people to be empowered, they need to be represented. And this is why I speak about accessibility. You need to be able to access your leaders for them to be able to represent you. Poverty is more than the physical elements. There's also the psychological elements in it as well. What we're seeing is that for many South Africans, we are despondent, we are disheartened, we've lost hope. And what we're seeing in South African politics today is that we have subscribed in very many areas to the politics of fear. We need to do this or else. We need to vote this way or else. We need to implement this or else. What we need to do is shift towards hope. Because what that does is it motivates young South Africans in particular to get up and to realize that when I have something to say, my voice will be heard. And that is the importance of empowerment, empowering South Africans through hope.
So, David, I'm confused. Let's just say I'm sitting here, I'm very unhappy with my lot in life.
Right.
There sits President Kabwa in the Union buildings, and Move SA have now won 51% in the next election.
Right.
If I have a problem, I've got to go to a Move SA office, right, to let them solve my problem. Is that what you're advocating?
No.
Because it sounds to me like that's what you're advocating.
What we're saying is that it's important to listen. I'll give you a very good example. It was a certain young lady I had a conversation with who is very big in the AI space. And she said, well, Dave, one thing we could do to start creating more jobs is I've seen there are so very many of these online working spaces. Why not set up a center and, establish an internet connection, help people apply for these jobs so that at least we can start to generate more income within that particular community, so that we have more people who can contribute to tax, so that we have a wider pool that we can use to address very many societal issues. The point that I'm making is that it is not prudent to develop a messiah complex, to believe that you are the only bastion that will solve all societal issues. It's important to listen. It's important to recognize that in order to serve, you must be willing to listen. And this is the approach that we are advocating for.
So I'm sorry to mark me down as a little bit confused. I have this hairstyle only because I've had my entire life nationalist governments that wanted to solve all my problems for me.
Right.
Instead of stepping the hell back so that I can solve my problems myself.
Right.
But it sounds to me that you are advocating for yet more hoops to jump through, not fewer, right? So, yeah, one would imagine that a young political movement would maybe be a little bit more modern and self-empowered rather than, yeah, I'm not hearing the space to move under Move SA. Do you understand what I mean?
Right.
I'm saying, it seems like there's more forms to fill in and more departments created and a bigger presidency.
No, it's actually quite simple. What you are referring to is oftentimes the barriers that we see towards reaching our leaders. I have to fill in a lot of paperwork. I got to send 25 emails.
No, I'm not talking about access to the leaders. Because the leaders can do nothing.
Right.
Right. I mean, what can leaders do? You've got 60 million people and maybe 1,000 leaders or whatever you want, right? Surely the best thing, and proof is there in countries that have done well, is when people are empowered to solve their own problems with a minimum of state interference, right? To me, the biggest problem we've got in South Africa is this idea that the ANC have managed to implement, saying, listen, we'll solve all of your problems. I mean, we're even hearing that's going to be the basis of their election next year, isn't it? We stuffed it up, leave it to us to fix it. Right? Surely, as a young, educated guy, you would want government to do less. You've seen the damage that they've caused. But yet you're saying that your mandate is for a little bit more government?
No, what I'm saying is my mandate is for better representation, because we need to empower more young people. What we're seeing is young people are retracting. They're drawing away. They're moving away from the notion of active citizenship. We're seeing that we're communicating within silos. We are not communicating as a wider society. We have lost a lot of the ideals of community that have helped us to move forward. So in order to solve this, what we need is a platform for young people, representation for young people, leaders that are willing to listen, leaders that are able to serve, leaders that will inspire hope so that more South Africans stand up, so that more South Africans take hold of the empowerment that they can get from being represented in the space.
Okay, so just for clarity's sake, right? And I've had this discussion with many of the leaders of some of these new parties. Some of them are even quite big parties. Herman Mashaba, Action SA, Bongani Baloyi, Songezo Zibi. These guys are all personalities that decided to start their own parties one way or another.
Right.
Right. Surely you have a template. You have an idea in your mind, right, as to what the Republic of South Africa would look like, and if you had the ability to influence what South Africa looks like. So, for the benefit of an old tired white guy, right, what country inspires you? What does the Republic of South Africa look most like? I understand it can never be the same, but what are we talking about here? Just so that people get a sense of what you're voting for. And sometimes you wonder if it wouldn't help if political parties put the name of the country that they would like this country to be like. Then people could make a more informed situation, a more informed answer. If it was the ANC, it would be Soviet Union 1965. If it was EFF, it would be Venezuela 2023, right? And these things become apparent. If it was the Democratic Alliance, probably the USA, right? What is Move South Africa? What is your avatar?
I think it's important to steer away from those kinds of generalizations. What we need to see is essentially a combination of what works and what doesn't work. I believe that in many instances it's important to emulate but not to imitate. So we take the good and we try to avoid the bad. I'll give you an example. If we look at what was happening in Botswana when it was achieving its growth as a state, it happened within a time where all of the surrounding countries around it were either colonized or dealing with a very high level of imperialism, yet the state was able to grow. What we need to do is...
Can you give me a better example? Because you're talking about a country here that's got diamonds on the soles of their shoes, right? It's almost a mono-industry country with 2 million people. Right? Let's not use Botswana as an example because it's a joke, right?
I would argue that it's not a joke.
No, I'm not saying the country's a joke. I'm saying as a political thing, you kind of had a one-party state. They had so much money. It's a bit like Africa's version of the Middle East. They're sitting there with the resources making them so rich that it makes the government look brilliant because they've got 50% of a diamond mine. They don't even have to do any work, and the fiscus is running full, and you've got 2 million people to spend it on. Not hard to run a country relatively well under those circumstances.
What we need to also acknowledge is the fact that we are also extremely resource rich. And this is why I am advocating against subscribing to a particular template, because our situation is unique. Our people are unique. Therefore, our approach needs to be unique. The reason why I mentioned looking at various states and coming up with what is good and implementing what is good is because it's important not to take the negative elements that we would see in other states. I'll give you another example. I think that might help to clear things up a bit. If we look at, for example, what happened in South Korea. It's a state that has grown in leaps and bounds economically. It's a state that has grown with a high level of cultural influence as well. It's a state where we are seeing a huge amount of development and industrialization. But it's also a state that is not as resource rich. So what we're seeing is that the positive elements there is that they have adopted an identity, they've adopted a culture, and they're sticking to it, but they're also implementing industrialization and growth. They are building a public sector that is creating a lot of the employment opportunities. And I'll draw this parallel to South Africa. It is my view and belief that one of the biggest issues that we are facing is that our state-owned enterprises are not operating optimally. For example, when you look at one of the best ways to solve youth unemployment, it would be through a lot of our state-owned enterprises. When we have projects that are continually working, creating jobs, creating avenues for young people to enter into the work environment, and then creating projects that are sustainable, what we'll see is a huge amount of economic growth. And this allows young people to better participate in the economy. But then we also need to look at what we have, where we see that we have an abundance of resources, and our resources are not always optimized in the way that they should be. And this is why I stress the point again that, yes, we can look at different examples, but it's important to understand the context within which we are working and apply what will work within a South African context.
So heaven forbid, are you asking, would you be advocating for bigger, more bloated SOEs? Because surely the problem at the moment is that they're falling over themselves with so many employees.
No, I think the issue is that there is a lack of good governance. In some areas, you do need to cut down.
If there was good governance, it would lead to far fewer jobs.
No, if there was good governance, it would create new avenues for job creation. Because remember,
outside of the SOEs. So in other words, if the trains run on time, industry would get a boost. Is that what you're saying?
No, what I'm saying is that...
Or you're just saying, let's put more people in the SOEs?
No, what I'm saying is that we need to create new avenues of funding, new avenues of money generation. For example, if we have more jobs, we have more people who can participate in the economy. If more people are participating in the economy, this means that our pool that we source our taxes from grows. It means that it allows greater opportunities for entrepreneurship. It means it allows for greater economic agency. Now, it does not end with our state-owned enterprises. It begins with them. So in many areas, we do need to optimize, and optimizing is an example of what we would see under good governance. So this would allow various other sectors of the economy to open up. And again, I stress the idea that we do not look at things in silos. It's important to identify a solution, to implement that solution, and that solution to deliver more solutions.
So let me get this straight from an ideological point of view. You are saying that an economy is driven by the SOEs and their performance, and after that, so in other words, let's just say we had a blank piece of land. If you went and put in electricity and trains and that, after that I would start my business. Is that right? It's not the demand that would lead to the supply of that state-owned enterprise. You're saying it's the other way around.
No, it's definitely the demand. What I'm saying is that we need more people to be able to participate. Are you familiar with the concept of the freedom dividend?
Yeah, I think I do, but tell me your understanding of that.
Right, so it was an idea popularized by Dr. King and brought into prominence again by Andrew Yang during his presidential run.
Yes.
And essentially the idea being that, well, if we can get more money to more people, they will have more disposable income. If they have more disposable income, they are better capacitated to participate in the economy. And if they can participate in the economy, it means that they have greater economic agency. And if you have greater economic agency, it means that you are able to make a more meaningful contribution, that you can ensure that more people within the economy are able to find avenues that work for themselves. These can be through job creation, this can be through entrepreneurship, and these again could also work through state-owned enterprises, but it begins with a greater flow of money in the economy.
So basically what you're saying is give a basic income grant and make it huge, so that everybody's sort of got a big income coming from the state, right?
No, and that's not what I'm saying
at all. And then suddenly I'm going to get this big amount of money put into my bank account. That's going to make me start a business.
What we need is more money in the economy. And this is why I advocate for empowerment. And this is why, again, I stress that we need good governance and we need to understand the context within which we work.
You do understand where the money comes from, don't you?
Yes, it comes from SARS, it comes from taxes, it comes from people being able to participate in the economy.
But where does the tax come from?
Exactly, that is my point. The point being that we need more people who are working jobs so that we can ensure that we have a greater war chest, more money that we can contribute towards building South Africa. And that begins by people being more economically viable, having a greater sense of economic agency.
There's only one way that happens, isn't it? I mean, you can go wherever you like. You can even go to a place like Venezuela. There's only one way that you're going to generate taxes, and that's by generating products that people like, right? And that doesn't start with a government initiative. That starts with somebody saying, hey, here's a good idea. Let's make microphones. And people will like them. And I really am passionate about microphones, and the next thing I'm selling them all over the world. And that's how we generate taxes. Right?
I believe that it begins with capital. You need money to launch businesses.
Yeah, okay. We're going to fundamentally disagree on that because, and I'll say, and I'm not trying to sort of pick a fight here.
Right.
I've never seen a business that was launched with capital, right? Because they don't, and if one looks and pick the best place you like with a thriving economy,
right,
invariably it started with a business that was not massively funded. It was started with a business that, the old thing of I did it in my garage kind of thing. Right?
I think you're misunderstanding what I mean by capital. For example, lots of young people approach me and say, Dave, I don't need a lot. If I had just something that I could use to begin, so that I could start approaching investors, so that I could start building a brand, so that I could begin participating in the economy. In South Africa, the reality is for so many South Africans, we don't even know where to start. We need avenues and a platform to develop ourselves, economically speaking. We need economic agency.
Dave, I don't know if I'm seeing it the same way, because what I'm seeing is highly entrepreneurial South Africans that are prepared to do it for themselves.
Yes.
Right. And I'm seeing them growing businesses out of nothing.
Right.
Right. And all I see is the failure of the economy to capitalize on that is because government eventually gets in the way. Right.
Right.
And, I'm a huge skeptic of state-run programs to do what people will do naturally.
Right.
Right. I mean, we've had a lot of contributions to this state of the nation from a guy like G.G. Alcock that's done a lot of study around township economies.
Right.
Right. And those economies are doing very, very nicely,
Right.
very entrepreneurial,
Right.
but low capital.
Right.
Right, and the capital gets built up the kind of like, let's call it the old-fashioned way. You start making bigger and bigger profits, and your business gets larger.
Right.
Right. I mean, what I'm saying is that what I'm concerned about is to hear out of a young, obviously talented future politician, current politician, but certainly your best days lie ahead of you, is that the government can do more. And I'm sort of saying, well, government, please do less, and let the people do what they can do. Let's not have the Minister of Trade and Industry that seems to be hell-bent on stopping trade and industry.
Right.
But it sounds to me like, I'm just trying to get, what I'm saying is that I'm expecting to hear from a young party.
Right.
Sort of saying, please, can we have less nanny state?
Right.
Right, and I'm hearing, and I do understand you couch it in very nice language, but it sounds to me like you see a greater role for government in business, as if taxes start with government, when taxes do not start with government.
What I'm saying is that we need less intervention. But for there to be less intervention, people need greater empowerment. For people to have greater empowerment, they need to be able to participate, meaning that they need greater economic agency. You mentioned that you're skeptical. Where might you identify the root of your skepticism?
The root of my skepticism is to the definition of the role of government.
Right.
In the cycle of creation of wealth.
Right.
The government is the product of wealth creation. It's
Right.
not the wealth creator.
Right.
Wealth is created by entrepreneurs and economic activity in general, right? Not the government. The government does nothing. The government's meant to be there to do the few odd jobs that a state would need to do. Collect taxes and then build roads and have rail and so on. We've seen what a terrible job the government has done with that. So therefore, I'm more concerned with, and we see it all the time. I mean, at the moment, South Africa has no shortage of initiatives that grow business.
Right.
Right. When business, to my experience, never ever. I'm trying to find. I went to an event a few months ago, and I'm trying to find the where this idea arises in South Africa only, or give me another example of where the government intervention, you mentioned capital, be it capital or otherwise, kickstarts business. I've never seen it. It doesn't work. It certainly hasn't worked in the Western world, certainly hasn't worked in the Eastern world. What does the Chinese government do? They create ports, harbors, rail, etc. They don't get involved in starting businesses. Those businesses are privately owned.
Right.
But, all I'm saying is, and I know we're sticking on one point, but to me it's a vital point.
It is a vital point. I really need to emphasize and stress this, that what is important, again, is empowerment. It is not, I mentioned earlier, government should not be a messiah. One person should not view themselves as having all of the solutions to all of the problems. I believe that empowerment begins when people are able to participate. It does not entail that there will be a nanny state. It does not entail that the government will take over everything. What it entails is South Africans being able to participate in the economy, to hold their own agency, and to have a starting off platform. The issue is many South Africans don't even know where to start, and that's the point that I'm making. Not to say that, hey, if you approach me, Dave, you're in government, I need help, that I will come and lift you up with my own two hands, that I can say, hey, well, this exists if you want to use it. But if you have identified an avenue of empowerment, go for it. What happens in many instances is that that avenue for many South Africans does not exist. When we need South Africans to be able to produce our own agency, there are two things I think that will allow this to happen. The first is entrepreneurship. That is extremely important. And entrepreneurship, by definition, is not where the government will come and take over or serve as a nanny. It is where the individual, it is where the business, and in particular, it is where the private sector is able to make that contribution. The second element is that the apparatus exists within government for the private sector to grow and to develop. And this will create that economic agency.
Okay, so let's move along now, because we really kind of got stuck on one issue, but I think it's an important one.
Right.
Where do you and your party stand on issues of you mentioned the word a lot, empowerment, and in South Africa you kind of go to racial classification.
Right.
And we understand that there's this sort of like baked in obsession with race where in this country. Where do you stand on race?
It sounds to me like you're leaning more towards affirmative action, but
No, I'm asking you where you stand on affirmative action. I mean, if you've watched any of these episodes, you'll understand exactly where I stand on that, and I'm not massively in favour. It makes no sense, makes no economic sense. But where do you stand?
Right. So I'll touch on the question of race first. And I'll use the example of BEE. In many instances, avenues of affirmative action that were meant for empowerment, and I use this word deliberately, have essentially been perverted. They do not serve the same functions they were created to serve. And if that's the case, then it defeats the purpose. What we need to do is to ensure that avenues still exist for those who are disadvantaged, but it should not disadvantage those who are competent and who are capable, meaning that you should not be disadvantaged because of your race, regardless of what your race is.
So would you still have quotas? Would you still have BE legislation? Would you still need X percentage of shareholding before you can tender for a government contract?
I think that quotas are not a prudent course of action. The reason why I say this is you might hear this example quite often. If I'm in a sports team and I am the best player, it should not matter what my ethnicity is, what my race is, so long as I can make a contribution. But at the same time, we cannot neglect those who have been marginalized. So what we need to do is go beyond, I'll use BE as an example. What we need to do is go beyond race-affirming quota systems. What we need to do is ensure that the most qualified individuals, those who comply with the necessary requirements, have the opportunity. I am not in favor of quotas as they exist today.
So would you scrap that legislation?
I think that it would need to be explored, because what's important is that when you make a change, changes normally occur by virtue of transition. You need to do the research, identify what works in place of it. Because what happens is, if you simply wake up and decide to scrap a policy completely, it may allow the opportunity for those who might be unscrupulous to negate the purpose of that policy in the first place. If I want to disadvantage a particular group and there is no framework that exists at all, then I am free to disadvantage a group. So when you remove a framework, you need to replace it with another framework. And this is why I speak about the collaborative effort. It is something that we're still looking into, something that I think needs a lot of attention, and something that we need to explore to due diligence.
Okay, and then I want to just discuss one last issue, and that is the role of the youth in South Africa. Right? There's this sort of like trope that's trotted out in South Africa that the youth have checked out of politics, and you know, it's a problem with the politicians, they're not appealing to the youth, and but yet all I hear from politicians is the youth.
Right.
Despite despite evidence to the contrary, I was once young. When you're young, you've got better things to do than politics. Do you think we have a problem with the youth and their political involvement? Do you think the youth should be more politically active?
Yes, I think the youth should be more politically active. I do think that we have greater voter apathy amongst young people. And I think the reason for that is because we do not see ourselves within these spaces. What we need to do is ensure that we are represented in these spaces. Now, this is a saying that you will very soon hear me say a lot. And if you go back and you hear any platform that I'm ever on, I always say the following. And that is that I believe that young people have the capacity and the capability to loosen the shackles of mediocrity that have bound so many to complacency. Now, the apathy that we have in South Africa is traced back to the fact that we do not believe that our voice matters, that our votes might change anything. Why vote if everything's going to remain the same? I'll use the example of Thailand again. Young people simply decided to stand up and to make their voices heard. And what we need to do is inspire hope again, because fear will keep us away, but hope will bring us to the table. And this is one of the reasons why I'm getting into the space of politics, because I believe in young people, I believe in this country, I believe in the future, and I believe that we have the ability to do something great. But I also recognize that we cannot do it alone. So young people are not only the future, we are the present. We are the generation of this nation, and we have great joy and jubilation. Oh, you're getting me passionate right about now.
Pastor Dave is going now. Eh?
No, really and truly, young people are capable, and we are proven. Not we are going to prove it. We are proving it, and we do that every day.
Well, let's hope that you and Move SA are able to get more young people interested in politics, understanding that they may not be interested in politics, but politics is interested in them. Let's hope we get more young people to the polls in 2024. David Kabwa, thank you so much for joining us today, and thank you to everybody that has joined us at the State of the Nation today. It's been a wonderful discussion with a young South African we're going to hear a lot more from in the future. Thank you so much for joining us. If you've enjoyed this, please subscribe to the channel. If you really like us, join our supporters club. And remember, we are going to have a live breakfast with many of the leading opposition parties. Sorry, Dave, we've got to go according to the numbers at this point where we've got...
it's all right for now.
For now. Yeah, our next edition, hopefully you'll be at that table. But we'll have our live State of the Nation business breakfast on the 10th of July. John Steenhuisen, Herman Mashaba, Musi Maimani, as well as Davi Rutt and Sandile Swana and myself asking them a couple of tough questions. So thank you so much for joining us today. David, thank you once again, and we'll see you on the next edition of the State of the Nation.